What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex. In this video, I want to talk about if Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is too difficult. I want to talk about the difficulty again in this game. I know I made a video yesterday talking about, if it's the most difficult From Software game, if it's harder than Dark Souls, harder than Bloodborne. But in this video, I wanted to talk specifically about kind of like the player feelings when it comes to the difficulty of this game, and really a lot of other games in general. Kind of what people, as gamers, how they react to games being difficult. And there's a lot of different kinds of gamers. Some people literally only play these kind of games. Some people are really driven to play these kind of games. You see a game like Cuphead, indie, very, very small studio that made that game, but that game is one of the most difficult games ever created. But you see the love that that game has had, and you've seen how huge that game has become, coming to the Nintendo Switch, all of this stuff. There's certain gamers that absolutely adore these difficult games. However, you do have to think about a widespread, selling point. You need to make sure these games actually sell, so you need to make sure there's enough people. And one of the main things I've seen from reading all internet personalities like YouTubers, articles in general, people reviewing it, one of the major things I've seen is that this game gets very, very difficult very fast. Now again, we can debate if this is the hardest From Software game. We talked about that yesterday. You can definitely let me know in the comments of this video if you think it's the hardest game. But the difficulty of this game is, from what I've seen, no joke. Okay, this is a very, very difficult game, and this is a game, and this is the more important thing. It's a game that gets very difficult very early on, and I think that's what makes it stand out, and to some people makes it more difficult than Dark Souls. Say Dark Souls was their most difficult, or I mean the franchise. I don't mean the first Dark Souls, but the Dark Souls franchise. If you think that that's most difficult, I have seen a lot of people talk about how this is more difficult, and one of the main reasons is because the things you fight in Dark Souls, the bosses, the bigger enemies, they, the hardest ones take place later on in the game. In this game, you face people or enemies with the similar kind of difficulty that you do in late game Dark Souls early on in this game, which really is kind of a deterring, thing to you, because are you really going to want to play a game where almost immediately you are hit with just a huge upscale in difficulty? It's tough. I've seen a lot of people that have said on Twitter, but they've been, YouTube personalities. I've seen a lot of people say this game just flat out isn't for me. I'm into difficult games, but this game isn't for me. Like, I can't do it. I think this game is even going to make some of the people, the people that play these games just to throw their controllers at the wall. Again, the people that have played Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Cuphead, all these really difficult games, I think, and they're the ones who toss their controllers and smash TV screens and stuff like that. I think this game is going to be very, very similar. Debatable if it's going to be harder or not, but the question is, you need to get people to play this game, and this game is, heavily focused, obviously, on single player. It's more focused on telling a story, and they tell it differently in this game than past games. Literally, the delivery method of the story is different in this game, so the point is to play this game all the way. And a problem that single player games have always had in like the internal metrics of them is that people drop off. Very, very, like under 20% of people finish single player games, which honestly to me is a travesty. I don't understand why that's an actual thing. I don't know how you can play, like a 15-hour, say like a God of War, or an 18-hour Uncharted or The Last of Us. I don't know how you can play that and actually not get to all the way, not actually finish it, not get all the way to the end. I don't know how that's possible, but people do that. Not a lot of people, very, very few, and those are the actual numbers. Very, very few people actually finish single player games, and those are easy. They're not all easy, but those are, single player games that are more straightforward, that aren't in it literally to upset you, and that's what From Software does. They make these games that are just, and they're not upsetting. They're games that require a ton of skill, and that's one of the reasons why I personally, I'm not the biggest fan. I'm not the biggest fan of these massively difficult games, but some of them I am. Like, I love arcade games. I love like games like Resogun and Nex Machina, Velocity 2X. I love that game to death. So I have played and Sound Shapes. I've gotten the platinum on Sound Shapes. So I love difficult games, but only certain kinds. I've never actually been able to fully jump into a game like a Dark Souls or a Bloodborne and things like that. I have played all of them, but I've never been able to really go that far because I don't know. It's just too. In reality, it's too difficult for me because it's a different kind of game than those other games I was just talking about. But the question is, you need to get people to play your game, and From Software, from what it seems, has literally every time increased the difficulty for the most part and made their games harder and harder and harder, and that's pretty pretty crazy. And the question I have, and just, and this is just me thinking out loud, I don't actually know, numbers or anything like that. Can people stick with that? Are people going to constantly buy the game? And is there enough people that are able to play this game from beginning to end, and maybe not even beginning to end, but just buy the game to experience the difficulty, knowing that they're not going to get very far? I don't know the numbers, but I assume that if the number of people that beat say an Uncharted is like 20%, they actually get from the beginning of the campaign to the end of the campaign. And it could be any game, Gears of War, Halo, it could be like an Assassin's Creed, any just story game, any. If it's such a small number and those games are pretty, you can get through them and they're not overly difficult, what is the percentage of people that can actually beat one of the Dark Souls games? Is it like 2%? Is it 1%? Is it like 0.5%? What's the number? And also, how many people get halfway? How many people get 25% of the way? What are all those numbers? I really would actually like to know the internal stats of how many people make it past X boss or X percentage of the game. I'd like to know that, because I feel like, and I don't know this, but I feel like with every passing game that gets more difficult from them, I would feel like the number would drop. And is that a bad thing? Is that something that it would hurt them down the line? I don't know. They keep making games. They keep making really great games. And I feel like they just really, really sell because people adore these kind of games. I feel like people buy these games without a care in the world that they're not going to finish it, and that they are going to stop halfway through because they just can't do it. I feel like that's just something that and truthfully, if I were to buy a game, say Bloodborne 2 comes out, and that's going to be the next video I talk about, say Bloodborne 2 comes out, I will most likely buy that. I will also know when buying that day one, I will know full well I will never beat that game. Most games that I buy, I have a personal problem in terms of actually beating games. That's just because I don't put the time in to actually play through it. I get distracted easily, stuff like that. But when I do buy a game, I do expect myself to get through it. If, The Last of Us Part 2, I'm buying it with the full idea that I'm going to completely beat that game. When I buy a From Software game, I have no intention of getting from the beginning of the game to the end. I just know that's not going to happen. And is that an okay thing to do? I think it is. But in terms of, is this game too difficult? Time will tell. People will tell. Sales will tell. If this game sells outstandingly, it doesn't matter if the game's too difficult, because people just continue to eat this stuff up, which is great. I think we need all those games I mentioned, all those kind of indie, smaller games. A lot of those games were from Housemarque, and Housemarque, nobody bought those games, and they had to completely change the game that they're making. Now they're making an online battle royale game, which sounds a lot familiar because everybody's making that. So, a lot of these difficult games are made from very, very small developers. There's not a lot of really huge companies or well-known that have historically really good track records that are making games like this. Really, From Software is the pioneer, and is also the biggest one by a mile that does things like this. And it's great to see them come out and not just have another game that's very, very successful. It's getting very high review scores. People are loving it, but it seems to be another very difficult game, and maybe even the most difficult game. So guys, let me know in the comments below, is this game, Shadows Die Twice, is it too difficult? And let me know any of the stuff I talked about in this video, if you agree, disagree, any of that stuff. And thank you as always for watching these videos. We're doing a giveaway of the game, so if you guys know somebody who doesn't have the game, or if you yourself doesn't have the game, make sure you guys enter to win the game. It's on our channel. Look for that video, follow the rules, and all that stuff is right up there. So make sure you guys subscribe, hit the bell icon, and I will talk to you in the next video.